Hello there, and welcome to the weekly Outside Views magazine on German politics. Now, the way for the citizens' money, the Bürgergeld, is clear. The coalition meets the union on crucial points here. In the day-long dispute between the so-called traffic light coalition and the Conservative Union over the conversion of Hartz IV into a citizens' money or Bürgergeld, both sides have agreed on a settlement proposal. As the Reuters news agency learned, both sides expect approval in the mediation committee of the Bundestag and Bundesrat, so Parliament and Federal Council, in a meeting this week. After I filmed this, unfortunately, but it definitely will have happened. The proposal for a resolution presented to Reuters provides, among other things, for stricter sanctions against benefit recipients and lower so-called protective assets. In addition, the planned waiting period of 2 years, during which the costs of the apartment will be covered without further examination, will be reduced to 1 year. The coalition is thus making concessions to the CDU and the CSU on crucial points. The protective assets that those affected are allowed to keep if they receive the state benefit should therefore be reduced to 40,000 euros. The traffic light had provided 60,000 euros for a single person. The CDU and CSU had called for a reduction. The originally planned so-called trust period of 6 months, during which the majority of the sanctions were to be waived due to a lack of cooperation, has been completely eliminated. In doing so, the government actually wanted to ensure that benefit recipients did not have to fear any sanctions and thus benefit cuts in the first 6 months. Although I didn't understand that one either. Citizens' income is to replace today's Hartz IV benefits on January 1st. Among other things, this means an increase in the income of single people by more than 50 euros to 502 euros. The Conservatives had blocked the previous traffic light bill in the Bundesrat. In the State Chamber, the Federal Council, the project is also dependent on the approval of the federal states with Conservative participation. With the slogan Freedom, Prosperity, Security, a new party wants to win members and voters from the Conservative camp. The newly elected federal chairman of the so-called Bündnis Deutschland, Steffen Große, said in Berlin on Tuesday that there was a representation gap in this political spectrum. This came about because the AfD failed as a coalition partner, so that voters, regardless of their decision at the ballot box, ultimately had to live with a red-green policy. One of the goals of this so-called Bündnis Deutschland is a reduction in the tax burden for employees. That means more net from the gross, said Große, who was once the state chairman of the Free Voters in Saxony. Secure, affordable energy, solid state finances, and more doctors in rural areas are also important to the new party. According to the information, the founding members also include former members of the CDU, CSU, Social Democrats, FDP, and AfD, and the Liberal Conservative Reformers LKR, which were once founded by former AfD members around Bernd Lucke. Große confirmed that Markus Scher is also a member. For years, Scher was considered an important networker in the North Rhine-Westphalian AfD, from which he left in the spring. Around 50 people took part in the inaugural meeting in Fulda last Saturday, said General Secretary Niklas Stadelmann. Many people interested in politics have already contacted their website, they say. The board has decided to plant a tree for each member. The party wants to take part in the elections to the Bremen State Parliament in May 2023. The curfew imposed in Bavaria in the early phase of the pandemic was disproportionate. That was decided by the Federal Administrative Court in Leipzig on Tuesday. Contact restrictions could also have been considered as a milder corona measure. They would have burdened the addressees less. That's what the judges found. The Federal Administrative Court thus rejected the appeal of the Free State of Bavaria against a judgment of the Bavarian Administrative Court, which had declared the curfew of March 2020 ineffective in the lower court. The ban imposed at the time on leaving one's own apartment to stay outdoors was a serious encroachment on fundamental rights, said presiding judge Renate Philipp on Tuesday in Leipzig. In the second case, the Federal Administrative Court confirmed the legality of the contact restrictions imposed in Saxony in spring 2020 and the closure of sport facilities and restaurants. The judges rejected a lawyer's appeal against the judgment by the Saxon Higher Administrative Court, which had previously declared the corona measures to be lawful. The federal government wants to end the deployment of the Bundeswehr in the West African crisis country Mali by May 2024 at the latest. The mandate for German participation in the United Nations peacekeeping mission MINUSMA is to be extended for the last time by 1 year in May 2023. That's what government spokesman Steffen Hebestreit said on Tuesday after consultations with the federal government in Berlin. The aim is to let this assignment expire in a structured manner after 10 years. The withdrawal of the soldiers is to be completed by May 2024. That's what the magazine Spiegel had previously reported. A full withdrawal will take about a year, according to previous estimates by military planners. According to this, it should start in the summer of 2023. Foreign Minister Annalena Baerbock, Defense Minister Christine Lambrecht, Development Minister Svenja Schulze, from my hometown by the way, and State Secretary Steffen Säbisch from the Federal Ministry of Finance met late Tuesday afternoon under the leadership of Chancellor Olaf Scholz, and Lambrecht had previously campaigned for withdrawal for months. Baerbock had advocated staying in the country. In August, the Ministry of Defense temporarily stopped the operation. The reason was the repeated denial of overflight rights by the Malian military government. In early September, the force resumed its reconnaissance mission there. France has already withdrawn its soldiers from Mali, and Great Britain has also announced a troop withdrawal from the West African country, citing growing concerns about Mali's military cooperation with Russia. The mission in Mali is currently the most dangerous of the United Nations missions. Recently, there had been repeated disputes between the military rulers and the UN mission. Mali, with a population of around 20 million, has experienced 3 military coups since 2012. Since the most recent coup in May 2021, the country has been led by an interim military government. After months of negotiations, the Catholic bishops have agreed on a new labor law. The triggers for the reform had expected more, though. Almost a year ago, 125 employees of the Catholic Church came out as queer in an unprecedented action and demanded an end at least to the discrimination under labor law. After months of discussions, the Catholic bishops of the 27 dioceses in Germany have now agreed on a new labor law. On Tuesday in Würzburg, they passed a corresponding change to the so-called Basic Order of Church Service. This is the legal basis for around 800,000 employees in the Catholic Church and in Caritas. Until now, it could cost these employees their job if they committed to a same-sex partnership, for example, or if they remarried after divorce. This should be over now. Explicitly as never before, diversity in church institutions is recognized as an enrichment, said the German Bishops' Conference. But the Catholic shepherds probably didn't have much else to do. The canon lawyer Thomas Schüller calls the bishops driven by the state labor courts, who have long since knocked the previous instrument of labor law sanctions out of their hands, especially with regard to personal conduct. The long-standing church-friendly case law has been slowed down by the European courts. That's what he told the German press agency. So the EU is good for some things. The reform movement #OutInChurch, which can claim to have at least accelerated the developments with its outing campaign in January of this year, only wants to speak of a partial success. The Ecumenical Working Group on Homosexuals and the Church criticizes the new basis for labor law in the Catholic Church as insufficient. It remains a mystery why the bishops do not explicitly promise trans and inter people the promised protection, said the spokesman Thomas Pöschl to the German press agency. He spoke of a serious deficit. The articles of the Constitution form the cornerstones of the Church's labor constitution. They apply to around 800,000 employees, as I said, in the Catholic Church and Caritas. However, it's actually only a recommendation and only becomes legally binding once it has been passed in the diocese. As part of the synodal path reform process, 93% of the bishops passed a passage that expressly forbids people not to be hired because of their gender identity or to fire them for these reasons. This passage is missing in the new basic order, criticizes Pöschl. Overall, however, he called it a paradigm shift that private life should no longer be evaluated by the Church in terms of labor law. The Berlin Public Prosecutor's Office has rejected the opening of investigations against Palestinian President Mahmoud Abbas because of his Holocaust statement at a press conference in the Federal Chancellery in August. The reason is that there is no initial suspicion of incitement to hatred. That's what the authorities said on Monday on request. However, the process is now at the Attorney General's office for re-examination because someone has lodged a complaint against the decision. A newspaper first reported on the rejection. In mid-August, after a meeting with Chancellor Olaf Scholz in the Chancellery, Abbas told journalists that Israel had committed 50 massacres and 50 holocausts against Palestinians since 1947. The statement caused great outrage. Scholz also condemned it afterwards. And a few days later, the police announced that they were investigating. Josef Schuster, president of the Central Council of Jews in Germany, said, "It is difficult to understand that Mahmoud Abbas' statements in the Federal Chancellery should not have any legal consequences. There should be no bonus for heads of government," he said. According to her own statements, the Hessian member of the Bundestag, Joanna Kota, has left the AfD and the AfD parliamentary group. This step was not easy for her after almost 10 years, is how she explained it. After all, she helped build the party in Hesse. But Kota accused the AfD of crossing too many red lines. She included the pandering to the dictatorial and inhumane regimes in Russia, China, and now also Iran, the opportunism and constant bullying in the fight for posts and mandates, and the establishment of corrupt networks in the party. She said, "I stood and stand for a constructive liberal conservative policy based on the basic law." Well, I don't believe her that one because she was in the AfD, but still. These would include the principle of personal responsibility, the recognition of achievements, a lean state, freedom of expression without censorship or surveillance, and genuine patriotism. Well, she's a nationalist, she's not a patriot. She will continue to work for this in the future as a member of the Bundestag, she says. But once again, she was in a right-wing extremist party. They are no patriots. They are nationalists. And I'll see you in my next video. I'll be back.